My theme for today's blog is thinking things through. Inspired by some recent thinking I had to do, I thought I'd take this opportunity to introduce some of the most useful thinking tools I know in the context of a real world project. I start this trip with the Trivium. Now, hang around people who know about the Trivium and you'll probably hear the phrase input, processing, output. This is a standard way of thinking about how the Trivium helps you get from input through to output. Processing is the portion of thinking in focus for this presentation. And since it can be complex, I'd like to look at it in some detail. Now, instead of thinking linearly, we tend to think circularly, ruminating and speculating over the same information repeatedly. The main cause of not understanding process, in my opinion, is a lack of tools with which to do processing. Now, what do I mean when I say tools? It sounds great, but how about taking the theory into the world of practice with a real world example? Okay. I recently faced a situation where my current way of trading wasn't adequately keeping up with market conditions. So, what you see on the slide is me describing the problem and what I thought to do about it. Exploring the current situation clarifies the problems and opportunities for the future situation. I do this as a writing exercise because writing is thinking. It forces me to be clear about my ideas. If you know Richard Grove, this step in my thinking process corresponds to one of his index cards. Once you've defined the situation, though, what's next? Well, one of many possible sets of thinking tools comes from Edward de Bono's CoRT system. It stands for Cognitive Research Trust System. The system was widely taught from elementary to university level students. It became somewhat popular in the business world, but not as much as his lateral thinking or six thinking hats. The seven thinking tools are dead easy to learn. They are also useful for thinking through various aspects of an idea. Each one can stand on its own, and the one I use the most often is plus minus interesting, but they all have their place. But then the question is, are they really all necessary? Well, the top benefit of using the CoRT system to organize your thoughts is that it's super fast. De Bono recommends using a kitchen timer set for 1 minute intervals for most of the exercises. This means you get focused on one particular part of the problem, but never stuck there. Thoroughness of the thinking derived from these tools is another important benefit. We can be confident that the idea was covered from multiple angles, increasing the probability of actually thinking a problem through instead of being stuck on just one portion of it. Going back to the Trivium method, more processing forces more output possibilities to emerge. When I started working on this particular problem, I thought only of writing code. As I thought about the problem, I realized there were also possibilities to do a presentation. And as I put together this presentation, I realized, well, this could be part of the book that I'm writing. But how much time do I really need to spend on this thinking? Well, it's not necessary to use all of the tools every time. You can pick and choose the ones you need. You only need to use the tools that your current project requires. You can also choose the order that most suits the problem you're facing. In this particular project, I didn't feel it was necessary to use consider all factors or other people's values. So what did I use? Well, one tool I used was consequence and sequence. With the current problem, I turned the consequence and sequence around, I started looking at the sequence of actions I needed to take and then at the consequences of that sequence. That order better fit my need at the time. The goal of thinking is not merely to capture what you know, but to get to the unknown, to find insights and opportunities for the expansion of ideas. When I started with C and S, I didn't know any of the consequences. And as I dug in, I found more and more. Now, getting off track while developing ideas is easy, so how do we stay on track? Goal clarity makes staying on track exponentially easier. The specific definitions of the word aims, goals, and objectives are not actually so important. More important is the understanding that objectives are nested in goals and goals are nested in aims. I find drawing out that mapping of the hierarchy beneficial, especially in larger thinking projects. Now, once the targets are clarified, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Pros and cons are a time-tested way of exploring a topic, and de Bono's upgrade to the classic list adds the category of interesting. Interesting is a kind of risk analysis, exploring positive and negative outcomes. Once identified, we can either take advantage of positive outcomes or cleverly turn negative outcomes to our advantage. This is the tool I use most because it's quick and easy and almost always enlightening. By thinking through interesting possibilities, I often find myself with much better ideas than when I started. Once some of the consequences and opportunities start coming into focus, how do we know which to prioritize? Doesn't it depend on which values are important? My personal upgrade to the first important priorities tool is to use John David Garcia's framework for defining an ethic. He taught that an ethic is a value with a set of beliefs and actions which either support or detract from the goal of having more of the value we're aiming for. So here, the priorities are my value. Each belief generates a set of actions, or actions generate the belief. I don't know, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. The last tool I used in this thinking session was alternatives, possibilities, choices. In this case, as I worked through the tool, I saw a new possibility which I used to go back to the other tools and update my thinking. In this way, the CoRT thinking tools are somewhat recursive and self-reinforcing. Once things start to get repetitive, though, it's definitely time to stop. Put it away for another day. Well, the CoRT system isn't a thinking system so much as systematic thinking. Systematic thinking breaks us out of unproductive circular thinking. It introduces linearity, which directs us towards our goals and, most important, values, especially when those are clearly defined. If you have one or more thinking tools you use for processing information inputs, leave me a note.